if those teams work in a very systematic way and they always come back to the leader and said, remember those ideas we were talking about, we started evaluating them. Out of the 5, 2 are showing very weak evidence, but we have 3 candidates and here's the progress.
Welcome to the Product People podcast, where we learn from amazing product leaders about product management, growth, and product ops. I'm today's host, Mira Lamus, founder and CPO at Product People. Today's guest is Itamar Gilad, author of Evidence Guided. Previously, he was product manager at Google for 7 years, then started coaching in 2017. Itamar created the popular confidence meter calculator, which we're talking about today. This is the second part of the episode with our guest. If you haven't listened to the first part of the episode, be sure to do so. So I love how you stand on the shoulder of giants, right? You say, hey, we can use my framework together with OKRs, if you want to use OKRs for setting goals. And for metrics, look at the North Star metric because it's already so popular and there's a lot you can read about it. Why invent a new thing? I love this part of your examples of how you also earlier brought in ICE for scoring. And I believe that's great for mid-level and junior PMs who tend to be overwhelmed about all the things that are out there that they could possibly use in their organization. And at some point, they end up spending more time in learning all these frameworks than doing anything useful. Okay. So it's kudos and thank you for that. I've also noticed in successful companies like Amazon that made it popular, and then we've experienced it while working at Zalando over several engagements. They have the PRFAQ. So the fake press release with the fake frequently asked questions that you would see at the end of a very, very long road. And that is also a way in those corporates to solve the HIPPO problem, because any person in the organization can write a PRFAQ. It's a lot of upfront work and they need to validate it with a lot of people and they need to get an executive sponsor for it, but it's doable. Have you seen at your clients this combination, or what's your opinion on this method?
This method invented by Amazon is very useful for a particular mode of development where teams are encouraged to come up with ideas, encouraged to be very innovative, encouraged to experiment, but they're not empowered to make the decisions what to build, not on the medium scale. Maybe small things, yes. They need to go up the chain of command and do these reviews and present in a very structured way what they created. Classic Apple used the same model, but you had to come with a demo, essentially, to show to various levels of managers until you reach Steve Jobs, which was like the extreme level. I saw this at Microsoft as well. So when your company works in this way and you have a group of managers that are extremely strong product people and they can really discern and come up with insights that reflect the market, that's a good model. But that's very rare. Most of the companies we encounter don't have a Jeff Bezos or a Larry Page or Bill Gates at the helm or Steve Jobs. They have ordinary executives, I'm sorry to say. So in this environment, I wouldn't recommend necessarily this model. But I think it's orthogonal to what I'm proposing. What I'm proposing is let's start with setting out the goals in a very clear way. And then we need a way to pick the ideas, which is the next layer. Because ideas come from everywhere, from the top, from the bottom, from outside the customers are proposing, from what we see in the competitors. And we have this contention between these ideas. And what I suggest is using something like ICE, but that's just one way, to evaluate as many ideas as you think are worth evaluating towards your goal, and then picking the ideas you want to test first. The exercise of prioritization is not to pick the ideas we're going to build in full, but to test first. Why is that? Because most ideas will fail in testing. If you actually are honest with your experimentation, you will realize they're not as strong as you think. And it's good that you have others. So that kind of breaks this dynamic of let's plan, and then from there on, it's just execution. Let's set goals, let's pick ideas and evaluate them. Then let's start evaluating these ideas, and then let's evaluate these ideas. And from there on, we can start moving in the direction of the goal, and we know when we can stop. That connects to the next layer, which is steps, which is basically how to combine building and learning. How to build your project, not through a series of engineering milestones or design milestones, but through a series of learning milestones. So maybe the first one is a usability test, the second one will be longitudinal test, the third one will be an A/B experiment. And if all of those succeed, then we switch to delivery. That will be for a big project or an expensive one. For a small one, you can do much less than that. For a very, very big one, a very risky one, you will do more. But that's another area where companies struggle. So those are the top three layers of GIST: goals, ideas, and steps.
Right. And then tasks are self explanatory.
I would
For
say the tasks are kind of how to bring this to the reality of agile teams, which is often a challenge because agile teams are very motivated to deliver rather than to explore, to discover. And what I teach in tasks is how to kind of extract them from agile jail and allow them to
agile
be
jail. Love that.
and allow them to be a little bit more of in a discovery mode, which is much more interesting to them, and also connect them to the context, which is something that Google does very well. So in Google, every engineer and every designer really understand what the user is trying to do and really are very user empathetic and also understand the business to some level. How do you do this with your team? A lot of PMs complain that the teams are very disengaged, they don't care, they don't want to know about these things. So how do you help them care? That's the full framework, the four layers.
I love this. Yeah, we had the same problem at some clients, especially the more old school ones valuing too much agile. In some cases, we ended up adding discovery as just a parallel thing that would happen and labeling it as that because stakeholders and line management was used to seeing some sort of output and that they know that the output of that is not code. But in that case, it was also sometimes hard to explain things that happen behind the scene, any API hardening or stuff like that. So what we ended up doing for that particular client, otherwise you would end up in a long discussion loops with their director level people about the roadmap. We segmented it in four areas. There was a discovery swim lane, then there was a mobile app, a web app, and backend API, anything that they couldn't see when it's launched because they would ask about it. And it worked quite well. I'm not a big fan of these roadmaps. I definitely love the now, next, later approach from a product pad. But sometimes you just need to do what you need to do because otherwise it wouldn't go through with these people. And it worked in many companies that like to micromanage development to have these swim lanes so they know when something is coming where.
Yes, definitely. And roadmaps are covered in chapter 6 of my book. I explain how you can use outcome roadmaps and basically focus first and foremost on when are we trying to achieve the outcomes, but then you need to expose directly what work is being done. Maybe initially we'll work on research, maybe later a bit of discovery, and then there will be things that are actually going to be launched with ETAs, etc. It's just not jumping directly to that last part. That's the challenge. So by being very explicit and honest and saying we don't know yet what is the right idea, but we're going to do these activities to discover, that gives them something to track on a timeline to see, yeah, the research is going on, we found some ideas, then we're validating them, we found some valid ideas that we want to deliver, and then we're working on delivery. So it's not about destroying the output roadmap completely, but it's about enhancing it with what we really need in the modern age that we're working in, where we can't predict which ideas are really the good ones.
Amazing. What other ideas do you have for implementing GIST without causing disruption or friction to the way people are used to working right now in an organization?
I think anything that I will say that will cause zero disruption, zero friction is impossible. We are going
Minimize.
to, yeah, we have to make this change and we have to change the way people are working. But one anti-pattern is trying to do all of it at once, trying to enforce all four layers at the same time. And that creates a ton of change, a lot of new process, and it doesn't generate immediately any improvements. So people get frustrated and tired of it very quickly. What I suggest is to break it up. And one way to break it up is by layer. Maybe you should start with goals first and then ideas and then steps, or sometimes you can start from the middle. And I found this to be much more successful with my clients. Attack the problem that everyone recognizes exists. If you are very bad at picking ideas, introduce eyes and idea evaluation. If you are not experimenting enough, introduce steps. If your team is very disengaged, introduce what I teach in tasks. And in this way, you can have, instead of one big war or battle to win, you have four smaller ones, and each one is more manageable. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is you need to build kind of your support group. You need to have at least one champion at the C level. You need to have other people rooting for you. The CTO is usually a very important person, people in engineering, people in UX. You cannot do this as a single person. You need to create a grassroots movement, if you like, to start kind of nibbling, not taking huge steps, but moving forward. And you'd be surprised how powerful this is, because a lot of companies really value their talent. They don't want people to be disappointed or unhappy. So if the engineers especially are saying, we really want this is really the way we want to work, that really helps you.
Hey, if you're enjoying this Product People podcast, check out our weekly live streams on LinkedIn and YouTube. Back to the episode.
What challenges have you noticed when transitioning it? So you walked through a few of the ways to mitigate this and ensure that is successful by rolling it out at each level rather than everything everywhere all at once. What other things would you recommend to people?
So the key challenges I encounter is at leadership level, there really are challenges with switching from telling people what to do to telling people what to achieve. The switch from outputs to outcomes. That's a new leadership style to them. Everything they learn, everything they experience in the past is when you reach that senior level, that's your job to tell people what to do. And they really are reluctant to let this go. And partly because of reasons of trust or distrust. They just don't believe that the people, the more junior people, at the team level or the mid level, can actually figure out what to do. And that's partly because they assume it's a zero-sum game. If they don't use opinions and judgment to decide, these more junior people will use their opinion and judgment. And as they're junior and less well-informed, they'll probably choose wrong. So why should I trust them when I can make the call? But of course, we need to replace opinions with evidence. If those teams work in a very systematic way and they always come back to the leader and said, remember those ideas we were talking about, we started evaluating them. Out of the 5, 2 are showing very weak evidence, but we have 3 candidates and here's the progress. That's a discussion that any leader will be happy to have, because it lifts the burden of just choosing from them. It lifts the burden of having these really tough discussions with all the stakeholders and everyone. And it really shows them that the team is working towards the business goals that the leader set. So it's hard to get to this point where the leader is willing to allow the team to do this, but once you do it, it's really transformative. So that's challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 is that the teams are so trained to focus on delivery, burning story points, moving tickets to the done state, consuming the entire scope of the sprint and delivering it, that when you come to them and say, your job is not just to be code monkeys, you need to help us discover, you need to take notes in interviews, you need to understand and empathize with the users and the business, they're a bit reluctant. It's not in their DNA right now. And I see a difference there between some European companies in this respect and American companies. In America, I see the developers more responsive to this message. So there, again, the challenge is how to break this pattern. And what the tip I usually give is stop focusing so much on the tasks, on the tickets or the Kanban stickies, and move them one step up. And tell them it's not just about completing these things and pushing code to production. It's about completing this usability test or this longitudinal test or running in this A/B experiment successfully. And that's like a mini project with a start, a middle, and an end, a set of target users, and a concrete measurable outcome. And when they think about this, and it's always like a few weeks long, it's not like a 9 months project, they are much more excited, much more motivated, and much more in the context. They need to understand much more, and then you don't need to hold their hands and tell them exactly what to do. They kind of figure it out, and you work with them in a much more healthy way than I see a lot of POs working with their teams today. So those 2 challenges and those 2 tricks can really help you move along much quicker in the direction you want to go.
And I'm also happy to add my perspective as a founder who went through this company having 0 people at the start of 2020 to about 50 employees right now and 2 or 3 layers of management, depending on department, is that now I'm in the hippo seat sometimes. And I do see, even with our PMs, this was also why we added a commercial leadership pillar in 2022, is that they say the correct things, but they don't say them to me in a way that helps me understand how this is valuable for the company or the client. I think one of the parts that I wish someone would have told me when I was an IC or middle management is you need to learn how to manage up gain the trust and also show empathy for leadership. I know a lot of PMs are like, oh, my boss this, my boss that. But imagine if you have that much pressure on you, your boss maybe has double the pressure, especially in these times of high financial constraints. So thinking of what are the incentives of this person, especially if you're trying to convince sales and other departments that are even more commercially motivated to do something for you, you need to understand what's driving their performance review compensation, what fears they have, and how do you show them that you're not going to do stupid things. I know it kind of sounds that it's coming from a bad place because it's like, yes, management should have trust and so on. And I think management has some trust, otherwise they would have probably let go of these people. But I think it should come both ways, that the IC team needs to also learn how to manage up and see what your boss's boss is going to ask for, because that's the level of anticipation you need to provide in order to be given free range to just come up and say, hey, by the way, we did this and that, and these are the results. Don't you worry, we're now going to do this step and that step. Feedback welcome. Okay, thanks, bye.
Yeah, totally. I call this the two worlds. The problem of there's the executives and the stakeholders and senior PMs live in this planning world where they really expect the roadmap to come together, and they expect the teams to deliver, and they expect that this will lead to business success. And then there's the execution world, and there's mistrust, because in the execution world, you keep seeing these plans coming down at you. Like, the most important thing right now is to launch this feature, and then 6 months later, actually, forget it. The most important thing is this other thing. So you lose trust in the plans. And on the other end, the leaders see the teams spending the wheels, wasting cycles, launching things very slowly, and eventually it's not what they expected. So this gap that we try to close with product management, but unsuccessfully often, is a real issue in many companies. And by doing something like GIST, where there are goals, there are ideas, there's the steps, and there's a lot of visibility up and down, it enables everyone to be on the same page. It enables to close the gap and to create trust. And that's a very, very important thing for any company to do, to create trust.
And I like your point on having one single thing. So either if you implement this or anything at all, it's better if everyone has one single source of truth. In a larger company, you could also enforce that via product ops, which is a much newer discipline that just helps company through their planning, through having one source of truth for analytics, for prioritization, and so on.
Yeah.
But I think the important part is also having one, right? I know that in some companies, you need to have a roadmap that you communicate to your enterprise clients and so on and so forth. That doesn't matter. And I think it's important for companies to understand how they are internally and how are they communicating with each other. And the rest of the things are just PR marketing layers, but not end up confusing themselves with different flavors of different roadmaps and commitments that someone just needed somewhere for a specific event.
I think in the B2B space, especially when you're selling to large enterprises, it's harder to implement all of these evidence-guided, outcome-based approaches, because it's just more intuitive for you that what the customer is asking for, every customer is super important. That's what you need to deliver. And you gravitate towards more old school, roadmap-based, opinion-based methods. That doesn't mean that that's the only way. And there are very successful enterprise companies, B2B, that are able to implement these things. Is there one sure way for every B2B? Absolutely not. But again, there are principles and there are methods that improve the odds of success in B2B that are completely evidence-based.
True. And I'm happy you touched upon that, because many times people just refer to B2C as those are the most intuitive examples. And selling and retaining customers in B2B is pretty hard, but there are ways to structure it and do it quite well, like the whole customer segmentation, different levels of involvement for different client types. You would have the ideal customer profile, you have the strategic ones, you have the acceptable that you're hoping to move towards self-serve and less effort internally. So there are a lot of ways to make it work. And through the consumerization of SaaS and B2B tooling is that also a lot of the B2C approaches are expected there, right? If you think of the 90s when everything was on premise and so on, people didn't expect good UI from their work tools. They just expected, like, if someone happens to wander off in an SAP currently, you're going to understand what I'm talking about. Is like Windows 98 or something crazy like that. But now that has changed. So unless you're SAP or something with like very long sales cycles, and once you're in there, they can't really get you out, you need to adapt from some things from the B2C world that most knowledge workers expect currently.
Indeed. I think you need to do kind of a self-evaluation. That's actually the first thing I offer in my book, in the introduction and also in the last chapter, of what kind of company you work for. If it's very traditional, if it's just making its first steps into, agile, or starting to think of development as a different thing than just delivery, it might be too early to jump into, advanced techniques of experimentation and prioritization and evaluation. So really figure out if you're in the right kind of company to do this. If you're midway there and you're kind of feeling stuck, you implemented a bunch of things like OKRs, like ICE, or anything else, but you still don't feel that you're really doing it properly, then I think it's very important to pick up a book and start looking for a complete system, not just bits and pieces that solve part of the problem, but a complete system. And you pointed out very correctly that a lot of the stuff I'm proposing is not original. I took ideas from much smarter people, but I put them into a meta framework where you have all the pieces in one place. And I get repetitively the feedback that that's one of the highest value for the readers and for my clients.
Good artists borrow, great artists steal, sort of thing, right? So there's a lot of methods you can take that are proven and have the advantage of people being familiarized to them, because there's always a learning curve for everything. So I really like that you do that. Thanks again for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to this Product People podcast. If you found it useful, please subscribe and consider giving us a rating. For more info, visit getproductpeople.com and see you next time.